understanding your own cultural context is a very important thing for understanding why we do what we do. This is also true for understanding how we became. We are very proud as Indians of the fact that in ancient times we were the biggest and most prosperous country in the world, and for long periods of human history, we were the center of the world's economy. Now, did that happen with individual, merchants sailing off to Indonesia or to the Red Sea to trade and so on? No. This was a huge commercial enterprise developed over hundreds of years, which was on a massive scale. Massive enough that a full 1/3 of the Roman Empire's revenues came from import tariffs on Indian goods. Did you know this? It is incredible. Hundreds of ships used to go out, hundreds of ships used to come in, and this is only on the west coast towards Rome. We were doing this with the Arabs, we were doing with the Persia, and then of course there was the other coast where we were going to Southeast Asia, sailing all the way through to Korea, and then of course there were the land routes. Now, how was all this trade happening? Well, it was happening through, as Sri Ram has pointed out, through corporatized guilds. These were not small corporatized guilds thing. These corporatized guilds were manufacturing guilds, these were the artisan guilds, and then there were the corporatized guilds for merchants. And they had colorful names like the 500, presumably because they had 500 shareholders, I don't know. At least in the beginning, I think they had 500, and they just had the name, they had more. And they had operations in all over Southeast Asia, for example, and offices there. And they had their own navy. In some ways, we had an East India Company of our own running. And they were very powerful because, interestingly, you will see that some of these guilds would last for hundreds of years while dynasties came and went. Suggesting to me that these dynasties that came and went didn't mess with these corporate entities because they were powerful entities in their own right. And similarly, how did they get financed? Well, they were financed through a very complex system of financing, which included temple banks. So in case you were wondering why there was a large amount of gold in our temples, it was not because our kings were very pious and were handing over all their money to the temples. I can assure you that getting Indian politicians to hand over their money to anyone has always been difficult. Yes, some of the kings did build grand temples, much of it so in the hope that they would be remembered into the past, and indeed that is one of the reasons we remember many of these great kings. But the reason the temple banks had such a lot of money is because they functioned as financiers and venture capitalists for carrying out these great voyages in which this trade was done and all this wealth was brought back. They would finance the production of these goods. They would finance infrastructure. There are many temples in South India which still have copper plate contracts. They have contracts carved on the walls of some of these temples. This was also incidentally true all over India, not just in South India. The reason you don't remember too much of it the remains are not there in North India was, of course, because many of these temples were destroyed. So in case you are wondering why Somnath had so much gold, well, just visit Somnath. It is on the coast. It was a major port. Right? Go and see Konark. It's right next to the sea. It was a major port. All those shore temples of Mahabalipuram, why were they there? Well, Mahabalipuram was a port. It was the main port of the Pallavas. So they had temples and they had temple banks. And so this is the way in which all worked. Interestingly, contrary to later beliefs that people began to have, the Brahmins were at the forefront of much of this trade and would personally travel all over the place both to trade as well as to do financial deals. The 500, for example, was actually originally started by 500 Karnataka Brahmins. They were created that merchant guild. So again, this idea that there are some Dharma Shastras have that crossing the seas was bad, etc. Well, one of the interesting things about the Dharma Shastras is that never in our history were they considered canonical. They are one of many Shruti texts which contradict each other all the time, and they were never canonical. By the way, anybody in this room can write a Dharma Shastra. There's nothing canonical about it. They are not, they are Smriti texts, they are not Shruti texts. Shruti texts are canonical, Smriti texts are not canonical. Anybody in this room can write a Smriti text. So, there was this very different view of India as a risk-taking country exploring the world, trading, doing innovations in all kinds of fields. There's now a new book by Dalrymple which is attracting a lot of attention because he's talked about Indian ideas and innovations in science and technology and mathematics that travel around the world. But in fact, we were doing this in all kinds of other fields as well, in business, in political landscapes, and all kinds of other spaces all the time, over thousands of years.